Thank you all so much for being here. I'm David Lanier. I owe a big thank you to a large part of the community here that has supported me over the years. So let me say thank you for, even if you've just mentioned my artwork to somebody else in a positive light, I owe you a thank you. So thank you for that. I'm honored that you'd be here tonight. Thank you, Katie, Jim, Sydney. I can't name all the folks at the museum that have worked real hard to make this exhibit possible, but I'm honored to have my work hanging here. Y'all have done a tremendous job of this. I've been looking forward to this night because I get to talk about the paintings, and we're going to kind of move all around the room. We're going to end up seated in here, and I'm going to walk you through the process of this painting, where you see maybe 50 pictures or so in progress, so you know kind of how the paintings are created. Hopefully you'll find that interesting. But thank you very much for being here. Some of you may have heard me say this before, but I like to tell people that I've got the greatest job in the world. My daughter is 35 years old now, but when she was in kindergarten, her teacher called me, and she called and said, I've got to tell you what your daughter said about you this morning in kindergarten. I thought, oh no, what secrets has she revealed? And she said, no. She said, we were going around the room, and each child was telling what their father did, where he worked, and what he did for a living. And they were going around saying, oh, my dad worked at the hospital or worked at the base and this sort of thing. And they got to my daughter, Mandy, and they said that she just hung her head and shook her head and said, my daddy doesn't go to work. He just stays home and colors. so that's the truth of it. I've stayed home and colored for 40 years. The style of artwork, the clientele, and a lot of things have changed in those 40 years, but still, when you boil it down to it, that's what I get to do every day. So thank you for making that possible for me. I don't want to lecture tonight. We're going to walk around, and I'm going to talk about a number of the paintings, some of the background stories and that sort of thing. I'll tell you kind of where some of my inspiration comes from, what I like to do, that sort of thing. But I say all that to say this: please ask questions as we're going. I don't want to leave any question unanswered. And if I'm running late on time as we're nearing the end, I don't want you to be sitting on a question that you didn't get to ask. I'm here to answer questions, okay? So y'all please feel free at any time just to speak up, and I'll do my best to answer it, okay? We're going to start, these two walls are over here are my early works. This is a retrospective exhibit, so I was really thrilled to be able to include some things that have been hidden in the attic for years. And there's a lot of little drawings and sketches and little color studies that accompany some of the larger paintings. I've saved those for years and years and preserved those for such an occasion as this. I think a lot of people have kind of a misconception that I, as an artist, just sit down and create something, or that I get a photograph, or somebody gives me a picture and says, will you paint this? That is hardly ever the case. The paintings go through a lot of planning, as you'll see tonight. They go through lots of steps, revisions, and there's a lot of thought that goes into it that you might not realize. So that's not just my work that is like that. The majority of artists go through that similar thought process. And that's what I'm eager to share with you. My art journey didn't start until high school. When I was in the 10th grade, I was training with the basketball team in the winter quarter at Albany High School in 1977. And the coach of the basketball team, I was just working out with him. I was an awful basketball player. But the coach of the basketball team said, Lanier, we're fixing to start the season. You know you're not going to be on the team. You need to go find another class. So he sent me to the guidance counselor in 10th grade, and they asked me, they said, would you rather have study hall or art? I said, you don't get credit for study hall, do you? And they said, no. I said, well, then put me in art. So that's how I got into an art class. I had no classes before that. I didn't have a particular interest in art other than a couple of drawings that you see over here. When I was about 7 years old, I loved to color, and I still love to color. But in the 10th grade art class, I had a really good teacher, and there's one drawing that I wanted to start off with right here. I doubt it's anybody's favorite piece in here. It's certainly not mine, but I included it in here for a reason. When I go to speak to students in high school art classes, I used to take this drawing with me, and I said, this is the first drawing that I did in that 10th grade art class. I can still remember sitting at the table working on that piece. It's a head coming out of a tombstone. I wrote, rest in peace, John, anonymous. You know, it's just something typical for a 15-year-old kid, you know, to draw. But the one underneath it was the drawing that I did at the end of my 10th grade drawing class. So this was the first day of class, and this was at the end of the semester, okay? So that's why these two are hanging together. I wanted to just emphasize the power of a positive teacher, or even if you're not an educator, but just, you know, somebody saw something in me that I didn't see and encouraged me for several more years in high school, you know, throughout that journey. And there's a piece that I'll get to over on this other wall that was done my last year in high school. It was a pencil drawing, but it hung in the U.S. Capitol for a year during my high school year. Many of these pieces on this wall are either from art school. After graduation, I played 2 years of baseball at Troy University. I was a pitcher, tore up my shoulder. I thought, what do I do now? I'll transfer to art school. So I went to the Ringling School of Art down in Sarasota, Florida. Had a wonderful experience there. I went there never having painted before. Everything I did was in pencil before that. One of the first days of class, we had to mix colors and match some colors on a color wheel. And I asked somebody, I said, I leaned over and I said, how do you mix the color brown? I didn't have a brown tube of paint. And everybody just kind of looked at me and like, you know, what are you doing here if you don't know how to mix colors? You know, and I said, I've never painted before. And they just kind of said, you know, rolled their eyes, you know, but I had a lot of catching up to do because so many students in art school were so far advanced ahead of me. I don't have any paintings from art school. They're all black and white. If you saw my paintings that I did, I think there's one over on that wall that we're going to get to. But if you saw my paintings in high school or attempts at paintings, they were awful. I mean, really awful. I've still got them. I don't think I even showed them to Katie when we were selecting works for the exhibit. Some of you are probably surprised to see that I've got some figure drawings in here. Those have been in my attic for 40 years, but I wanted to include them because that's how I learned to draw better and accurately and quickly. In art school, we had a drawing class Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 3 days a week for 2.5 hours a day. And the models in the art class would start off with 1-minute poses, then move just a little bit, and you've literally got 1 minute to draw a 1-minute picture. And 3 years of doing that really developed my hand and eye coordination. And I look back on those early drawings as some of the most formative years of what I do now. Even though I'm not drawing figures now, I still use that same technique of learning to draw with shapes and draw things quickly. Okay, all right, let's move on over here. After I got out of Ringling, I was still only working in black and white, and kind of a natural progression is to go from pencil to black and white or watercolor before you get into oils and acrylics, because you have to really change your mindset on how you approach your technique. When I got out of art school, I found out immediately, my degree was in illustration. I studied book illustration. I didn't know anything about a fine art market. I thought to make a living in art, you had to do something commercial related. So I studied book illustration. And as soon as I graduated, I found out that I was in competition for freelance jobs with people that had been doing it for 35 years. And I thought, how am I ever going to do this? The magazines and the books that are paying well, you've got to have experience. There's a lot of people, fighting for those jobs, those assignments. So I started working with low-budget black and white magazines. If you were a youth or had a youth in Sunday school classes, in the Baptist and Methodist churches, I did a lot of illustrations for their Sunday school material. They didn't pay well, but they were easy to get work from. I kind of used it as on-the-job training. Something that would have called for maybe just a quick pencil drawing or a quick little watercolor that I could do now in an hour of time, I might spend days on it teaching myself how to paint. I wasn't getting paid much for it, but I was learning on the job, and it kept me busy. And while I was doing that, let me see, we'll get there in just a second. While I was doing that, I started getting some advertising clients that wanted me to do some drawings and paintings for advertising. That was back in the newspaper day. First State Bank was my largest client. Some of y'all might remember First State Bank here in Albany. I did a lot of newspaper ads. They advertised heavily in the newspapers. Back then, that was back before personal computers. I would have to draw a concept for an advertisement with markers to make a proposal to them to see if they wanted to use the artwork. And we worked together probably 4 or 5 years doing ads for them. These were called comps. This was a marker comp, and then the final artwork. The only change in this one, I changed from the one I had a little boy swinging on the swing, and to get a little bit more movement in there, I wanted a girl's hair blowing in the wind. So I was learning, to paint, even though it was still in black and white. As I progressed, but let me go ahead and touch base on this one. This was the only painting that I've got from college that's in here. This is what I thought I was going to be doing the rest of my life when I was in college, was illustrating books and children's books and that sort of thing. So this was done in watercolor. This was in college, and it was a fun assignment, but looking back on it now and where that market, the way it's changing now, years ago, an author of a book would go through a publisher. The publisher would hire an art director and an illustrator to tell the story, and it would be a significant cost involved. But now, with everybody's talking about artificial intelligence and that sort of thing, now some of these book publishers are using artificial intelligence, and they can have their story illustrated in a couple of days, for minimal expense at all. So the artificial intelligence is really hurting some of the artists and the illustrators that are working in those kinds of fields today. So I'm thankful that I went more into the fine arts. The art school that I went to was a little more abstract oriented with the fine arts. So that's why I went more into illustration. But anyhow, let me move over here to this one. This is a watercolor. Even during my illustration days, this was just a few years out of college. But this watercolor, I would keep something on the easel or the drawing table that wasn't commercial related, even though while I was doing the other jobs. So Andrew Wyeth was a big influence on me. I'm sure some of y'all remember him. He was probably the most prominent national artist in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. His artwork still sells. Some of them sell for millions of dollars. You may have recall the painting Christina's World of the crippled woman pulling herself across the grass up in Maine. And but anyhow, he had a big influence on me. And so I did a number of portraits kind of like this in watercolor. And but after about 5 or 6 years of illustration, some friends of mine from Jacksonville, Florida, that used to live in Albany, called me and my wife and said, David, there's a really good art show up in Charleston, South Carolina that I think you'd enjoy going to. And she said, it's the biggest wildlife art show in the country. It was drawing about 50 to 60,000 people. And it was about 100 of the best wildlife artists nationally and internationally. So Kathy and I went up there. We were as poor as we could be. We shared a room with them. And anyhow, we went to the art show the next day, and we walked into this great grand ballroom in Charleston, and all these beautiful wildlife paintings were all over the walls on the display. And we walked around, and I didn't know that world existed. I mean, I still, thought you had to do commercial art and make a living. So looking at all of that work, I looked at Kathy, and within 10 minutes of being in the show, I said, I'd rather be doing this than illustrating books and magazines and doing advertising art. And she said, well, if that's what you want to do, I'll support you. So we came home on a Tuesday. I called all my clients, all my publishers, and I said, don't send me any more work. I quit. And I literally quit it that day and never looked back, never went back and did any more illustration works. And the first painting that I did, somebody told, it was a pair of ducks that we'll get to over here. And somebody said, oh, you need to show that to Ducks Unlimited. So I showed it to them, and they published prints of it. They said, can we make it one of our fundraising prints? I said, sure, I'd be honored. So they published that one. The next painting that I did was of some bobwhite quail. And Quail Unlimited, another conservation group, called me and said, we'd like to make that our national fundraising print. Would that be okay with you? And that just really got the ball rolling and really just affirmed that what I was doing was, connecting with people. And it felt good to be able to work with the conservation groups and just to know that funds for what I love were being raised through the sales of my artwork. There's some studies, some sketches and studies. I hope you'll just take notice of some of these that are placed next to the drawings or the paintings. A lot of sometimes there's maybe 4 or 5 sketches on average. I think we usually just included 1 or 2 here rather than just put all the little paintings all over the place. But let me walk on over here. This painting here, I was quail hunting down in Thomasville, and I was on a property called Borderline Plantation, and we were riding horses, and we got back, and we were racing to the house. It was just about to rain, and I took a photograph of this field. There was just a little bit of light striking the field, and I came home and I showed Kathy the picture of that, and I painted it, and she loved it so much. This was back in the 90s, and she loved it, and I said, well, why don't you just keep this one? So we kept that one for her. That was my gift to her. I'm going to finish on this painting. So I know we're going to probably be pushed for time, so I'm not going to say a whole lot about this. This is one of the most recent ones. This was done this year. I think it was completed in maybe March of this year. It's called Best Day Ever. Let me see. Here's a couple of examples of color studies. For the larger paintings, I like to do about a 6x8 postcard size painting after the black and white studies. If I'm doing a painting for a commission for a client, I like to show them the black and white sketches and let them pick one of those, and then I'll go to a color version of it, because sometimes I might paint these same 2 dogs together just like this, but I'll change the background completely. I might have a sunset behind them. It might be overcast. I experiment, with what I'm going to do. You don't just go out there and take a picture and say, this is what I'm going to paint. Every now and then I do that, but it's very, very rarely. Okay? Of all the color studies that are in here, this one was just completed just maybe 2 months ago. So this is a painting that I'm proposing for a retired politician down in Florida. He said, David, I want you to paint something South Georgia for me. He said, I don't care what you paint. I said, do you want quail hunting? Do you want pine trees? Do you want oak trees? He said, just make it look like South Georgia. So I haven't gotten the go-ahead on this one, but that's a scene from one of the roads just south of the airport here in Albany. Okay. Does anybody have any questions so far? I'm just rambling.
This watercolor.
The watercolor, I think that one was around 87, 88, somewhere in there. That was about 2 years after graduating from college. Okay. You had one?
Yeah, so you said that you're making multiple black and white sketches and then color. How long do the black and white sketches take?
That's a good question. If sometimes, like I'll point to these for instance, those are just a couple of hours each, but I might throw away a couple before I hit on the idea that I like. Those are drawn out of my head. I've drawn dogs and quail enough I can kind of spin those around in my head mentally, and they're not detailed, yet. So that's just a couple of hours worth of work. The color studies may be a day, 2 days at the most. Did that answer that for you?
Yeah, you actually got my next question, which was going to be, do you always use a reference photo, or can you?
A lot of it is made up now. I've got files. I've mentioned this to the teen art board that was here the other night. I've got files in my computer of clouds, grasses, pine trees, oak trees. I'm going to get to one in just a second that shows you how I pieced it together just from a bunch of different photographs. But sometimes portions of it are just made up now. I might look to a photograph for lighting or something like that, but a good bit of it's just from imagination now. Yes?
Are some of them an actual photo or something commissioned that somebody wants this remembered? I mean, it's something they've chosen and they want that particular spot or landscape.
That's what I was going to talk about on this one right here. This painting was done for a plantation property up around Beaufort, South Carolina. I haven't met the owners of the property to this day. They called me through a decorator, and they had just built a large home on their property up near Beaufort. And they said, David, they want you to create 5 paintings for them. And I said, well, what do they want? They said, well, one of them, it was 2 business partners that owned the property. One of them was a quail hunter. The other one was a fisherman. And there was a large river, one of the tidal rivers that runs through it. They said they want some scenes inland and they want some scenes of the river. So I went up there and spent 2 days with the decorators and the property manager touring the property. And they asked me, they said, well, how would you like to see the property? And I said, well, we got 2 days to do it. Weather was nice. I said, how about if we toured on horseback? They said, yeah, that sounds good. So I was excited about that. It's just a slow pace, beautiful blue skies. And we were on our way down to the river. I wasn't even thinking about painting this scene. And one of the girls rode her horse underneath this big oak tree. And I said, stop. I said, that's it, right there. I didn't have anything preconceived. When it hits you, it hits you. I said, stop. And she was on her horse right there. And I clicked the picture just to get the reference of her up against the tree, the size of the horse, the scale of it. And when I got home, I did a real small sketch just to present to them and say, this is kind of what I'm thinking. But the horses that we were riding were the guest horses. And there were 2 business owners that were commissioning the portraits. So when I got home, I went out to one of the local plantations and I posed the horses in the positions that I wanted them. And but then I got the property manager up in South Carolina to send me 2 photographs of their horses viewed from the front, the side, and the back, so I could see what the color markings on their body would be. So these are the positions of 2 local horses, but then referring back to the photographs of the owner's horses, I was able to turn those horses into their horses. So, okay. This one is one that I wanted to spend a little bit of time on. Usually when I do talks, this is the one that I like to talk on about composition. I probably put more thought into this painting than any other painting in here in terms of composition. This was done for the Plantation Wildlife Arts Festival down in Thomasville, Georgia, to represent the art show. And they asked for a quail piece. And what's the first thing that you see when you look at this? Okay, the lightning strike. Several people said that. I was on Dr. Dowling's property in Terrell County, walking around just shooting background pictures one day, and there was a fresh lightning strike on a pine tree. And I thought, oh, that's a neat thing. There was bark scattered everywhere. It had obviously happened like a day or 2 before. And I took some pictures of it. I thought one day I'll put some quail under that. That was probably maybe 10 years before I painted this painting. And so I referred back to that. I put the pine tree in there, but the positions of the quail are nothing's accidental in here. This scene didn't exist at all. It's completely made up. But I put this bird right here at this angle. Well, first of all, the lightning strike draws your attention. This bird is positioned here, and then this bird looks you over this way. If you noticed, I put some curved branches in here to keep your eye movement going this way. This is what a movie director does with every scene in the movie, okay? I get one shot at it. I don't have to do a whole movie, but I get one shot, to control the eye movement and the lighting. So anyhow, this bird looks you up to this one. I've got several curves that bring you over to these 2 birds. It's real subtle, but there's 2 strands of Spanish moss that hang down from these limbs that point you to these 2 birds right here, okay? There's a hunt party back here on horseback that showed up good in my black and white sketch, but here's the sketch over here. You can see them here, but when I started painting them, they disappeared into the background. So what I did was I poked holes back there through the pine trees to let some light in. It's kind of like putting a little tiny spotlight in the dark that draws your eyes back there. So I put those in there so you'd see the hunt party on horseback. But back to the birds. These 2 birds look you over to this one, and I intentionally had it facing you so that he stops you. He looks you straight on, and it stops your eyes. I put this tree back here so that it would reflect in the water, so that the reflection would also stop your eye from going out of the picture, okay? So then your eye drops down to this bird. This bird stops you, then your eye drops down to this one, and then I put a branch right here going back to the first one so that your eye is in a continuous movement, an oval kind of cycle of movement, okay? How are we doing on time? Doing good? Okay, all right. This early morning and late afternoon are most dramatic lighting. If I'm on a property and it's the middle of the day, I like to go underneath the big oak trees where there's a canopy. Middle of the day is very contrasty. Actually, my favorite day of all is an overcast day. I know that might sound gloomy to some of you, but everything is just beautifully, evenly lit. You can see all the details without the harsh shadows and the contrast of that. This particular painting here was done for our property over near Savannah, and it was just maybe 2 years ago. A property owner called me and he said, David, I want you to paint something for me on my property. I said, well, what do you want? He said, anything you want to paint. I said, okay. I said, do you want, it was a quail hunting property. I said, do you want shooters? Do you want quail? Do you want bird dogs? Do you want all of that? He said, I just want you to come tour the property and paint what you want to paint. I said, well, what size do you want it? He said, whatever size you want to paint it. I said, well, where are you going to hang it? He said, I'll find room for it. So those are the kind of things that just, give me free rein to do what I want to. And I love it when people trust me like that. I still showed him sketches and that sort of thing, to make sure we were on the same page. But it was a much darker day than this when I was out there. And it was gloomy and maybe even drizzling. But I came on this scene and I thought, oh, that's just beautiful. That road going through there. It's a white, sandier soil than we have here. But all of this was very dark. And I actually painted it a brighter orange, like a really bright sunrise to begin with. And I thought, no, I don't like that. It's just not looking right. It looked a little too artificial. So I literally had to go back over all of that. I didn't do my color study on that one. I only did a black and white. But so I went back over all of that and toned it down a little bit, where it's just kind of a hint of some warm sunlight, hitting the tops of the trees. This one here is called Willow Woodies. This was done back in the early 90s, 1995, I believe. So this was just a few years after I started painting the wildlife. My parents owned a little bit of property on the Flint River, where I was the only one that would go duck hunting out there. It was at the end of Sportsman's Club Road, if you've been out there that way. But it's grown up out there now, and I don't hunt out there anymore. There's probably still some birds there, but there's just too much development around it. But anyhow, there's a number of sketches that I did leading up to this. I thinned out a lot of the vegetation. This is on the backwaters of the Flint River. I thinned out a lot of the vegetation back there just so it would give it a nice soft backdrop, for the birds to be seen clearly. When I would go out there duck hunting, I didn't have a bird dog, so when I would shoot the birds and they'd fall out into the river, I'd have to strip down and swim out there myself in November and December, and freezing. But I'd get the birds, and I always provided ducks for Christmas dinner at my grandmother's house. That's a good question. Illustration taught me to piece pictures together, for one thing. I mentioned, I would have to pose models for the illustrations, so that taught me to piece things together. But it also, with the illustration business, if every project wasn't satisfactory, you didn't get called back from that publisher for a future project. So no matter how long it took to get it right, I would spend that amount of time on it, to get it right. The illustration probably was a little more graphic. It didn't have quite the busyness and detail that I enjoy painting in nature now. I like things to look a little messier. Everything doesn't have to be perfect. Is that what you're asking, maybe?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's the one of the two dogs with the birds flushing there. That's the most recent major painting in here. So that one is completely made up. And that's kind of, if you were to ask me what my favorite paintings are in here, the correct answer from most artists would say the one I'm working on now. But truthfully, that would be one of them, because they gave me free rein to do anything, and that's just how I envisioned it. I've always been drawn to realism, but I don't try to make it look like a photograph. The subjects are usually detailed. Sometimes the background is, but I don't try to make it look like a photograph. If you get up close to some of these, there's some really loose brushwork in there in the areas that are secondary. I do believe that the background now should really support the subject matter, the subjects. No, sure, that's fine. 'Color, well, For instance, that one's made up. I put that dark shape back there behind the dogs to let the dogs stand out more. Okay. The distant tree line back there beyond the grass is very loose brushwork. It was tempting to go in with small brushes and pick out the pine needles, and that sort of thing. But that wasn't what the painting was about. It was about the dogs and the positions and the movement. That painting is about more of an experience. The flushing of the birds, the habitat that they're in. It's more about an experience than it is a pretty picture to look at. Okay, the quail hunters will respond to that one in a way that perhaps other people don't, because they say, I can see the dogs trembling, I can hear the rush of the wings on the birds, So that, I hope that answers that about the background. Okay. That's a good question. The question was if I do a lot of commissions, do I do anything else kind of for fun in addition to that? First of all, in recent years, I've had the luxury of turning down the commissions that I don't want to do. More and more people, when they commission me, a lot of people say, how do we do this? I say, well, and I'll show them some examples, and I say, somebody wanted this when they told me what to paint. Other people just say, I trust you, do what you want to paint. And a lot of them say, well, I trust you, you just come up with some ideas. So everything in here I wanted to paint, every single one of them. Okay. I do get calls for poodles, and some little, some things that, aren't really my kind of thing. I still do a lot of dog portraits. There's some on that center wall. But the things I enjoy most, I do tell people if I weren't doing sporting art and painting so many dogs, I would be doing a lot more Southwest Georgia landscapes. I'll get to one over here in just a second. Yeah, that's a good question. When do you know when you're done with the painting? When it can't be improved on. I mean, that doesn't mean they're all perfect, but I reach a point sometimes where I'm painting and I'm thinking, what else can I do? And I might sit the painting down for a couple of days or a week and do some sketches or start working on the next project. And a week later, I go back and look at it with fresh eyes, and I'll think, there's no need in doing anything else to it. I can always add more birds, instead of having, 6 birds flushing, somebody might like 10, but if it doesn't add anything to it, it's just a mental click that's in my head that says you're finished with that one, move on. Okay. I did want to talk about conservation in art briefly. This was the first duck painting that I did in 1992. Ducks Unlimited asked me if they could make a fundraising print of that. This one was just a couple of years later. It's a scene from Arkansas. I took a photograph that didn't have the dog in there. And it was a place that I duck hunted. And when I got my photographs back, I thought, that distant tree line looks like the same colors as a chocolate lab. And so I went out to Gillianville Plantation and borrowed a dog and posed him and painted this. And Ducks Unlimited saw it, and they asked if they could make it one of their national fundraising prints. And it's a big honor. They choose maybe 4 or 5 artists each year. But the way that works, at the time, they had 5,000 Ducks Unlimited chapters across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And they printed 5,000 prints of that, flew me up to Memphis to sign all of the prints. It takes 2 days to sign that many prints. And but they framed them all up, and within the course of the year, and they have auctions all across the country. And so all 5,000 of those prints were sold at auction. That print averaged $220 at each auction. So if you do the math, it comes out a little bit more than $1 million was raised off the sale of those prints. So, when you're at auctions and that sort of thing, that's where that money, that's how they're, raising their funds for conservation. With Ducks Unlimited, it's all about wildlife habitat preservation. So that's why to this day, I still enjoy working with the conservation groups, because it preserves the habitat of the animals that I enjoy painting so much. Your question a minute ago about what I would do just on my own time, it would be more of this kind of thing. South Georgia landscapes. That's out on Nonami Plantation, just south of the airport. I'm going to speak on this one briefly. This is a very recent painting called Land of Giants. This was a property owner in Lee County. Said, David, I want you to do a painting for me. I said, what do you want me to paint? He said, whatever you want. So I said, okay. And so we toured his property and rode around, and there was this massive old oak tree. And the brush on it was grown up over my head. And but I kept going back to that. It's a quail hunting property, so most of the property was pine trees. And we went out and photographed this tree, and I told him, I said, I really like that tree. That's an awesome tree. And he said, well, I like it too, but I like my quail woods and the pine trees too. And this big oak behind here, there were actually two of these big oak trees here, and you couldn't see any sky through them. You couldn't see the base of the oak trees. It was just like a solid green wall behind them, and all of this was grown up real tall. And he said, I love that idea of the tree, but I'd still love to see my pine trees. So I said, well, why don't we take out the big oak tree that was right here? So I took that out of the composition, and then I went back into this one, and I poked holes where you'd see the sky in there, and so that you'd see the branches under here. And he took his, what do you call it, the mower behind the tractor, bush hog. He took the bush hog and mowed all of this down so I could get a clear view of the tree. And with it being local, I had the luxury of going out there probably 3 or 4 different times. A sunny day, a cloudy day, early morning, late afternoon. The first thing I do when I photograph a property is kind of get my orientation on what directions, where's the sun going to hit it? Is it going to be morning light, afternoon light? So I went back out late evening. This is a late evening scene, and bathed the tree in warm sunlight, and we added the trees in there just to, not the trees. We added the deer in here just so that you could see just how massive that tree was. Without the deer in there, it's just an ordinary landscape. But when you put that in there, then you really see just how big that tree is. Okay. Now this painting, again, going back to your question, what would I do just on my own? This was not a commissioned painting, this fire scene. Just growing up in Albany, you've all seen the fires. As the day quail season ends, end of February, you start smelling smoke and it gets hazy all over town. I went out to one of the plantations years ago, and this photograph was buried in my computer for probably 20 years. And I was just going back through thinking, I want to paint something for me, and I hit on these photographs of a nighttime burn, and I thought, that's kind of interesting. And I tell other artists, I say, I encourage them to kind of follow their heart with what speaks to you, to your soul, rather than painting for the market. I don't paint for the market. I happen to have some overlap, subject matters that do sell, in this area. But this kind of scene just struck me, and I thought, well, I'll paint it. I think it's pretty, and so I painted it. And I told my wife, I said, Kathy Lynn, I don't know if anybody's going to like this one or not. She said, well, I like it. And she said, why don't you post a picture of it? I said, okay. So I put it on Facebook, and within 15 minutes, I got a message that said, how much? And I I told the fellow, he was a large property owner locally. I said, well, I was going to take this one up to the show up in South Carolina, and I was going to take it up there in a couple of weeks. And he texted back, how much? And I said, well, let me check with my wife. And he said, I'll be at your gallery tomorrow morning. I want to buy it. So he came in the next morning and bought it. But so, I never know, honestly, if what I paint is going to resonate with other people. Usually it does. Some of my favorite paintings will publish prints of it, thinking that it's going to be a good seller. And some paintings honestly fall flat. Some of my favorites. And I can't think of a reason, for that. It's just for whatever reason, somebody didn't see in it whatever I saw in it, So I always just say, don't paint for the market, just paint from your heart. Paint the things that you would paint even if you didn't have to sell them. We made prints of this one, and I took the prints up to a show that we used to do up in Easton, Maryland, a big duck hunting, goose hunting territory up there on the Chesapeake Bay. And I had this prints of it in my booth there, and all these people were walking by. Why in the world would anybody paint a forest fire? The first 20 or 30 people, I explained to them about controlled burns and how it benefits, wildlife and ecology and so forth. And finally, after, explaining it to so many people and hearing that all weekend, I just started saying, I thought it was pretty. This nighttime scene up here, again, if I were to do more things that are just things that appeal to me, I'd experiment more with some nocturnes. That's what the nighttime paintings are called. This scene, though, that's out on Deer Run Plantation locally. When I went out there, it was the middle of the day. The grasses were yellow, the sky was blue, the trees green, a typical winter day with a blue sky. And I was photographing it, and I thought, I was kind of envisioning it at night, and I thought, this would really be cool to try it as a nighttime painting. So I went home and experimented with the colors, trying to turn it into nighttime. I almost put some deer, I thought about putting a few does walking around in the scene, and then I thought, no, I'm just going to let it be just a peaceful winter landscape, from South Georgia. This one, this turkey painting, the background I photographed out on Dr. Dowling's property in Terrell County on Partridge Pea Plantation. The birds weren't there, of course, but I had gotten some photographs of some turkeys, and I sketched them all out and put them in this composition, and to get the reflections of, some of this was made up, the water wasn't in there. I built a little clay model of the birds, the cypress knees, and put them on a mirror. And then I tore some paper and I covered up parts of the mirror so I would see which parts would reflect, and then photograph that little model that I made, so that it would just add a little bit more authenticity, to the scene. But I took this painting, and I had never done a turkey before, and I thought, well, I work with Ducks Unlimited and Quail Unlimited. There's an organization in South Carolina called the National Wild Turkey Federation. I thought, well, I'll contact them and see if they have any use to raise funds off this. So rather than just take a picture of it, I crated up the painting, looked up the president of the Turkey Federation in South Carolina. I addressed it to him and mailed the whole painting up there to him with a note on there that said, if you feel like you can use this in any way, I'm going to keep the original, but if you wanted to make prints of it or do anything you want to with it, just let me know. As soon as he got it, he called me and he said, David, I love this painting. He said, can we make it our national stamp print? I said, yeah, I'd be honored. If you want to do that, that's fine with me. And he said, yeah, I'd love to do that. So they printed that as their national stamp print, I think back in 1999 or 2000 or something like that. I'll end on this one, and then we'll go over to the slides. Okay. This one is a fairly recent one. This one, Deer Run Plantation, the last covey of the day on their plantation, they call the sundown covey. And this is a very recent one. It was probably just 2 years ago or so. Um, I think you may have asked earlier kind of where, how are things different from the illustration projects? I'm paying more attention to lighting now, the play of sunlight and shadow within a scene. And this one, I wanted the horses and the mule-drawn wagon. You may not be able to see it from there, but they're tucked back here in the shadows. They weren't here. All I photographed one day was the background. I just rode through the property and photographed the background. And then I went back through my files of hunting out there where I had pictures of the mule-drawn wagon and the horses. And I put those in there and I muted them. I grayed them down with a cool kind of blue, violet, gray color to get them to blend into the shadows back here. And then I wanted all of the attention to be on the dogs. So I brightened up the sunlight there to let them be the focus. And I posed the owner of the property, and I'm one of these. I think I'm that one right there. And then another friend of mine posed as the guide. So, that's kind of a throwback to the illustration as far as posing things, but more of a fine art approach in terms of the lighting now. There's different elements to a painting. You've got color, you've got value, you've got movement or rhythm. I'll leave out a lot. I know you've got soft edges versus hard edges. There's a lot of elements of design that go into a painting. When I first started painting, once I figured out how to make things real, my concentration was on making things real. Now that I've been doing this for close to 40 years, I'm paying more attention to the symphony rather than the individual instruments. Okay, painting is a lot like music. There's, with music, there's tempo. There's solo artists, solos. You get what I'm saying. Now I'm paying more attention to the entirety of the whole thing. And what I've learned, I've got a file in my computer. When I see a painting that I really like, whether it's a portrait or figurative or whatever, I'll save it to a folder called Inspiration. And I'll go back and look at those pictures sometimes and think, why do I like that painting so much? And I analyze it and try to figure out, what makes that so appealing. Not marketable, or anything like that. It's just what makes that painting successful. And that's what I'm trying to pay more attention to. The one of the deer under that large oak tree, I felt like that one's got more, that one and the two dogs that I'm going to finish on, those have more of the symphony going on in them in terms of elements of design. It's not just a straightforward portrayal of the subject matter. I think I know how to use this. I practiced earlier today. I feel like one of those, I told Katie, you need to put tape over all the buttons I don't need to use. I'm officially a grandfather with a remote control now. I'm going to walk you through, this is probably a 2-month painting, but I'm going to walk you through the process that I go through as I paint it. This was one of the first sketches. Can y'all see from the end over there? Okay, I'll try not to stay in front of it. This was the first one of 2 or 3 sketches that I sent the client initially. I'm looking at, lots of times in my quail paintings, the birds are flying off to the sides or going away from you. And I thought, it'd be cool to have the dogs looking at you this time with the birds coming toward you. Because if you're a quail hunter or if you've been out in the field with dogs, you're typically walking up behind the dogs, and many of the times the birds are going to fly away from you. I thought this would just be a different perspective. So I'm paying attention to these dark shapes up against a light background at this point. Right, the second sketch that I sent him was this one. This is kind of the same idea, but this one is after I'm starting to use some photographic reference. I haven't gone out and photographed his dogs. He wanted his 2 dogs. So it was going to be a setter and a pointer. So I drew those dogs before I used his photographs of his dogs for that. This dog I thought was a little too young looking, so I changed him later. You've all heard the stereotypical artists, how they're very emotional. You know, you never know, artists are very moody. There's truth to that. I'm that way. My wife would vouch for that, right? The reason for that is paintings go through an ugly phase. They really do. When people ask to come over and see what I'm working on, if I'm doing a project for somebody and they want to see it in progress, I usually tell them no. And they kind of, do that. And I tell them, if you see it right now, you're not going to think I know what I'm doing. And I'm being totally honest, because a lot of times I don't even know what I'm doing. But the paintings go through an ugly phase, and the larger the painting, the longer the ugly phase lasts. So that's where the stereotypical mood of the artist comes in. When you get bogged down in that ugly phase, which we'll get to in a minute, it's just, I mean, your emotions just, as an artist, at least mine do, even though I've done it for 40 years, my emotions tank, you know. But I'm going to go through these. I usually start with the subjects. You work from dark to light. You start with a darker color and you gradually pull things out of the shadows. So I'm starting to lay in the body on this one now. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I'm going to start the head of the second dog. Okay. So in art school and every class I've ever taken, they teach you to do the background first. I didn't like that approach. I like to do the subjects first and know that I got the subjects right, and then I build the background around them to complement the subject. Okay, can y'all see? Okay. There's about 50 of these, so I'm going to skip ahead to some of them that I think are more noteworthy. This one is the dog on the left. I told you, you start with a darker color and then you gradually build layers. Most of my works are acrylic, so I'm not blending wet paint with wet paint. I'm working in individual layers to develop depth. So they start off dark like this, and then you gradually get lighter and lighter as it goes. You notice I can't talk and do that at the same time. So now you can see I'm starting to build up those lighter layers on top of that darker base color. I haven't figured out the position of the tail yet. That's why I haven't put the tail in there. Usually I move around on a painting, or this painting is large enough that if I'm working up here and this is wet right here, I'll come down here and start painting down here. And by the time I've got the layer down here, I'll go back up here and start. I don't like a mess when I'm painting. I don't like messy areas. They just bother me. I don't keep everything clean, but when it comes to my art, I tend to piece the subject matters like a jigsaw puzzle and put them together, and then you'll see in a minute how I approach the background. All right, that's the dog, basically. I never put my brightest colors in there. I don't put the brightest colors in there, the highlights, while I've got a white background on the canvas, because nothing in the painting is going to be as bright as that white background. Okay, so even though this looks gray right in here right now, it's going to look white by the time I paint a dark background around it. Okay, now I'm starting to add the birds. I'll just kind of go through these quickly. There's no way to photograph birds in flight like this, but I've drawn quail enough that I know the wing positions. I've got one mounted bird that I keep in the studio that I use just for the angle of the head. and I'll look at it. I can paint it male or female just from that one mount. All right. I'm going to get several birds in here on this one. You'll see that I'm just kind of piecing it together like a puzzle. None of these are as bright as they're going to end up being, because there again, that white background throws everything off. In art school and everywhere else, they teach you to tone the background and kill the white, but I don't like the messiness of it. It just bothers me. All right, I'm going to start the messy phase here. All right, this is a 30 by 40. Okay, so the more, I can't handle a lot of mess, so I tend to work on a large painting in segments. Okay, but all I knew right now was that I wanted some dark shapes behind those birds to pop the birds off, to pop the dogs off of the page. Okay, they're not going to be that black in the end. Remember, you start dark and then you gradually get lighter as the painting goes. Can y'all still see okay? I'll jump ahead a little bit. I'm still working in segments, okay? I've probably got maybe 5 layers of different brightnesses, different values as we call them on here. I'm left-handed, so I work from this side to this side because I rest my hand on the painting as I work. So I'm trying not to smear everything. If anybody's got any questions along the way, let me know. Here's a little bit closer up. I'm starting to establish the grasses, the direction of them. We were talking about the symphony of it and the movement of it and the importance of the background. I just feel like it's, I like to tell people I almost hear music in my head when I paint grasses. That's the honest truth. It's got a rhythm and a flow to it. And that's what I'm establishing at this point of it. All right, now I'm going to jump all the way back to the other side of the painting and start getting more and more details. I don't know anybody else that works in segments like this, but I just can't handle a 30 by 40 mess while I'm working. But these are probably about as bright as that's going to get. I'm going to do that all the way across here. And then at the end, once I get the brightness right, I'll go back in with some washes of gold and orange and put the sunlight on it. Okay. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Is this boring to you? Do you want me to finish, or is this okay? Okay. All right, you can see I'm getting further along. It looks like I've put a little bit of the golden color up there just to mentally calm my mind and make sure, let me know that, yeah, it's going to be warm sunlight. It's going to look right in the end. I didn't used to do this, but once for South Georgia scenes, I use the same color palette for most all of my paintings, or depending on time of year. If it's spring, I'll have brighter greens in there. But I use the same colors. I wouldn't attempt this if you aren't confident in your color mixing, okay? So I know that I can leave a white hole in there and go back in and paint the exact colors. Color mixing at this point is secondary. You don't even really have to think about it as far as matching a color. So that's a good question. All right, this one should be getting close to the end here. I've still got it a little bit dark down here. I think I've got all the birds in there. I haven't painted their feet on some of them yet. So, and is there anything in there that bothers you? I'll tell you what bothered me. Okay. This leg just looked really, there was nothing in front of it that blended him in back with it, back into the background. It just almost looked like a cutout, okay? And I thought, nah, I don't like that, so the next ones will probably address that. Yeah, that's the final. You can see I've thrown a lot more grass in there. I've made him kind of dissolve into the background as part of the scene now. I mean, you can see the colors of that aren't quite as warm as the painting on the wall on this particular monitor. But that's basically it. Hopefully you found that interesting. This style of painting isn't for everybody. I've got friends at my art shows that say, David, you need to just grab a big brush and paint the grass like this and be done with it. But, you know, getting back to the question on the comments on the backgrounds earlier, I feel like the subjects deserve a good background. And it's an integral part of just my mindset. That's what makes my work unique to some of the others. Some of my artist friends say, oh, that's classic Lanier, dogs, quail, and grass. You know, the lighting is everything. I mean, granted, there are some scenes that are subdued and meant to be subdued color and that sort of thing. But one of the first things I do when I'm approaching a painting, whether it's a commission or something personal, you know, if I've got a particular scene that I want to paint, you know, I try to go out there and observe it under different conditions, different lighting conditions. But I ask myself, what's the mood that I want to create? You know, that's the purpose of the color studies. I didn't do the color studies when I was younger. I jumped right into the painting, and it either worked or it didn't, or either I had to repaint something. But now the lighting is everything. It sets the mood. You know, there's a lot of similarity, like I said, to doing this as a still shot versus a movie production. You know, and the movie producers, you know, I mean, a lot of it's done post-production on the computers, you know, now. But that's what makes the movie, you know, is the lighting, you know. Does that make sense? Yeah. Rather than just go out and click a picture and paint it now, I go out there and I go out there again and I go out there again. Unfortunately, I've had the budgets to work with where I'm not in a hurry to get it right, you know, and get on to the next project. You know, I spend more time. I've got some color studies that I didn't bring that aren't on the walls, but sometimes I'll paint the dogs and I'll take a picture of it and print it, just like a little 6x8 print off my printer, computer printer, and then I'll paint completely different sky colors on 3 different scenes. You know, that way I don't have to redo the dogs again on the study, but I might paint 3 different skies just on those studies, and then I'll decide, you know, which one I like best. So I try to pay more attention to the lighting now, definitely. So, there was an illustrator that I learned of named Maxfield Parrish that you may have heard of. Are you familiar with it? Okay. The lighting on that Land of Giants made me think of him as I was laying out that painting, because the tree wasn't lit up like that with that orange light on it. But he was a well-known illustrator, I want to say back in the 20s, yeah, 100 years ago. But I've got a couple of his books, and he was my favorite illustrator when I was in illustration, he and Norman Rockwell. But he painted a lot of warm, you know, landscapes and that sort of thing. What did I take from Wyeth? Yeah. Let me talk about subject matter wise. He painted his friends and his neighbors and his local scenes. He had homes in Pennsylvania and Maine, and he painted just what was around him. That's what I started off doing. Painted friends and portraits, you know, people in this area, the landscape. You know, I've got friends that once they learn to paint, they go to Jackson Hole and try to get in the market out there, you know, where there's a tremendous wealth, and paint the Rockies. And I talked about it at the opening reception. I'm content to stay in Albany. I love Albany, Georgia. Usually with the landscapes, I kind of know where I'm heading unless I'm taking trees out or moving things. But I know the general scene, you know, before I paint it. I mean, Wyeth, he would do pencil drawings of a pulley, you know, or branches. I mean, I've been to his museums in Pennsylvania and Maine, and I'm in awe of what appealed to him. It was just so ordinary, you know. The leaves, just a few leaves hanging down from a tree with nuts on it, or, you know, a blossom, a single blossom, and everything else is dark browns and greens, and then you just got something that most people wouldn't find terribly exciting. And, you know, that's kind of why we named this exhibit, why we did Beauty in the Humble Places. It's, you know, some of these things, you know, you may find more beautiful than others, but I find beauty in grass. You know, that's why I spend so much time on it. You know, other people don't see that the way I do. I'd have fun even if the dogs and the quail if they weren't in there. Like I said, I don't paint for the market, but at the same time, you know, art's a difficult career to make a living in. You know, I don't paint for the market, but I have a general idea if I'm going to be able to sell a painting or not. With that fire painting, I had no idea. You know, there are some works that other people don't see, you know, that have never been exhibited, you know, that might be a little bit different than what you would expect from me. But, you know, I keep a list of, I keep a backlog of commissioned paintings. So, you know, I've got obligations, you know, to do, you know, the kind of things that I'm doing now. If I went too far into a totally different realm, I would risk losing some of my collectors, although I would likely pick up more collectors, you know, for different types of subject matters. That's a question that a lot of us artists have with one another at the art shows that we go to. Sometimes we'll see somebody bring, some of these art shows we've been doing for 30 years, and we see the same artists that are like family at these shows, and sometimes somebody will have a totally different look to their exhibit than what we've seen for 15 years, you know, and we'll talk to them and they say, oh, I just got tired of doing that. I had to do something new. And that thought is in my head a lot, you know, to try to do something new. But the newness would probably be less attention to wildlife and more attention to the landscape. And I think you'll see some of that from me in the near future. You know, I didn't even really talk about many of the dog portraits. That's a lot of what I do. A lot of head and shoulders portraits. They're fun to do. They're challenging to do, and it makes people happy. You know, for me to create those paintings for them. But after I do a few of those, that's when I block out some time and do something like the fire painting or something, you know, a little more experimental. Last week I was waiting to get approval on a couple of projects from some clients that I was doing paintings for, and I did maybe 5 or 6 or 7 drawings, and it had been a while since I had done some pencil work, and I did maybe 3 or 4 of the drawings were done in brown ink, that I hadn't used brown ink before for the drawings, and you know, most of my drawings were in pencil. So I'm experimenting a little bit, just kind of testing myself to find out, you know, what I like and you know, maybe what I don't. Okay. Anything? No, that's fine. I've gone a long time. Y'all have been so patient. Thank you for that. I appreciate you staying here. It means a lot to me. Thank you, Katie.